Thank you very, very much. It's Matt Hongoltz-Hetling, which you were right there. Well done for first try. That's actually very good. Welcome everybody. I just this morning read a news article about a bear. Actually, I read two. One was that a bear fell off a 15-foot waterfall in Colorado Springs and had to be euthanized. It was like a 250-pound bear, which means that it was a Matt Hongoltz-Hetling sized bear fell off a waterfall and died, which I thought was kind of odd. And then there's another article that was reported in like 18 news outlets about a bear that basically walked through a town. And I just thought this is so interesting. And this is a little bit of what I learned while I was researching this book, is that bears make news. Right? This bear, just an animal, walked through a town, and boom, there's 15 news articles about that. And bears are in the news all the time. You know, I keep an eye on the bear news. There was a story that made the rounds not that long ago about Cocaine Bear. This is a bear that basically got into a drug smuggler's cache of 75 pounds of cocaine, and the fallout from that. And there's also a story making the rounds about a polar bear hotel in China. And so the idea is that they built this hotel that every room looks down into a central location where there are a couple of polar bears in kind of like a traditional zoo environment. And so what all these stories have in common, or what they all kind of like underscore to me, is that, you know, we really see bears as something like real and authentic. Bears tend to receive a lot of anthropomorphic tendencies from us. You know, we'll portray bears in all sorts of different roles in our imaginations. We might think of them as comic bumblers. We might think of them as kind of like the villain in a horror movie, you know, that the big horrific threat. We might look at them as kind of noble representatives of the wilderness, you know, kind of like a noble savage type stereotype. And the way that we project ourselves, our culture, onto these animals really has a interesting impact, you know, because it not only is reflective of how we view those animals, but it actually can alter those animals' behavior. And sometimes it alters those animals' behaviors in ways that can boomerang back on us. And that is a lot of what my book is about. Before I really get into it, I would just like to thank, you heard as you came in, the singing of Heather Johnson. She is a young amateur musician who participated in a song contest that I hosted to promote the book, called A Musician Walks into a Bear. She was a high-ranked entry, not the winning entry. I'd like to thank Ona and the Beverly Public Library, and of course the Friends of the Beverly Public Library. Let's thank Ben Franklin, the father of American libraries, and I would also like to thank cheetahs. Cheetahs are one of my favorite animals. I'm so amazed by them. Every time you see a cheetah run, they can accelerate up to 60 miles per hour in a heartbeat. They have strides that are up to 23 feet long. So when you see this cheetah kind of like zooming over the ground there, it's almost flying. And it's not only the fastest land animal, which most people know, but if you think about it, a cheetah is probably the fastest that a land animal can be. After 4 billion years of evolution and, you know, kind of like engineered tinkering, we've come up with a body design that just can't be surpassed for speed by and large. And not only is the cheetah equipped with this amazing, exquisitely designed form for speed, but it is also very, very fierce. It has a stronger bite pound for pound than a tiger. And that speed and that ferocity mean that it has the highest hunting success rate among all the big cats. About 50% of the time it goes hunting, it brings down a kill. And if you were to meet up with a cheetah in a dark alley one night, that could very easily be a fatal encounter for you. You do much better if you walk down that dark alley and encountered this guy. This is an African wild dog. It's relatively weak. It's only about 50 pounds compared to 100 pounds for a cheetah. And yet, when you look at these two animals that occupy the same ecosystem, there is a natural history mystery that emerges almost immediately. If there is a kill that the cheetah has made, a single wild dog can drive this fierce predator away from its kill and kind of like take over ownership of that kill and start eating it. So why would the wild dog eat while the cheetah retreats? That doesn't seem right. The cheetah could kill that wild dog. So why does it give up its meat? The answer is that the wild dog has health care. Um, if that wild dog were to scrap with that cheetah, it would be injured. But if it escaped with its life, it would be able to return to its pack. And it would hang out with its pack, and its pack would make more kills. And this dog could hang around and eat and be defended from other predators and bigger animals by its pack mates. And eventually it would heal up and be able to once more shoulder the responsibility and the burden of keeping the pack running and making its own contributions. So nature, that is what healthcare looks like. Now, a cheetah, on the other hand, doesn't have any healthcare. If that cheetah were to fight that wild dog, it could kill it. But if the wild dog managed to just bite it on the paw and injure it in a way that slowed it, it would lose that exquisite speed. You know, that really perfect body design that it has isn't very tolerant of flaws. And so its speed would be lost, its success rate in hunting would plummet, and a slow cheetah is destined to starve and die. This particular cheetah, I think, is sleeping. I'm not actually sure. I stole that image from the internet. So, you know, we have the solitary cheetah versus the social wild dog. The advantage to the cheetah is that it gets to eat all of its kill. You know, it doesn't have to share. It can just take those resources and run with them. So that kind of raises a question a little bit of why are animals social? You know, other than healthcare, what will they sacrifice to help others? So let's think about family groups for a moment. Still talking about the wild kingdom here, but groups of human society. So let's think about aunts, as in uncles and aunts. So an aunt will risk her life for her niece. And you know, we like to say that that's because they love their niece, and that is certainly true. But from an evolutionary perspective, genetically, the niece carries about 25% of the ant's DNA. And so the DNA that drives the ant's decisions is benefited, tolerant of a certain amount of risk to the ant's life, because that DNA is in the younger generation and can be carried forward. So this is like a selfish DNA move that it will motivate us to protect those who share our DNA. But in many creatures, back to the wild dogs, animals will protect each other that don't share that DNA. They will treat an unrelated pack mate like family. You know, they'll sacrifice the food for healthcare. They'll sacrifice their safety by uniting against larger enemies. They'll sacrifice their time to babysit each other's young. And the most social animal in the world is probably the ant. And now this time, I'm not talking about the uncles and aunts, I'm talking about the insect. An ant is really strong, but it's no match for a spider or a grasshopper or praying mantis. But you put a colony of ants together, well, my goodness, that's a very formidable force in nature. So an ant colony is genetically identical. there are hundreds of thousands of daughters here, all working off of one DNA blueprint. So an ant will sacrifice everything for any other ant. It's one cluster of genes defending itself. And so what is more successful? We have the spectrum now that we can think about. We can think about, we have a cheetah that acts in a solitary manner for its own self-interest. And then we have ants, which treat each other as almost interchangeable parts in a colony when it comes to risking themselves. And so these maps tell the story. This is a global ant distribution map. Everything that is in red is ant territory. There are literally 1,000,000 billion ants. That's a quadrillion. This little inset down on the bottom, those little colored patches are a pullout of Africa. Those are the cheetah populations. There are only 7,100 cheetahs on the world. So that is quite an imbalance. E.O. Wilson, who's a myrmecologist and a famous naturalist, he says that ants have the highest biomass in the world. That means that if you were to weigh up all of the ants and put them on a scale, that they would outweigh certainly all of the cheetahs, but they would also outweigh all of the people or all of the blue whales or any other animal that you tried to stack up. So that is the power of self-sacrifice. That's the power of having kind of universal military support and healthcare and childcare. And so now let's get to another one of my favorite animals. This is humans. So humans are amazing for many reasons. We're the only animal that smokes and lifts weights, but we also alone can choose our social structures. Some countries, we're the only ones who can kind of choose, like, well, do we want to build a society that's more like an ant, or do we want to build a society that's more like the cheetah? And some countries have gone very much on the ant end of the spectrum. I'm thinking of authoritarian communist places like China and Russia at different points in history. Under kind of like communistic rule, they have the maxim from each according to his ability, to each according to his need. That's one extreme. And libertarians have a theory that the opposite end of the spectrum, all capitalism, is best. They would say to each according to his ability, needs be damned. This is a flag that they have devised to kind of represent their culture. The porcupine is kind of a totem animal for them. It's the idea that they won't be aggressive, but if you try to impose on them and mess with them, they will defend themselves very ferociously. So put a pin in that for a second. Hi, my name is Matt Hongoltz-Hetling. I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself. 12 years ago, I was working as a merchandiser in a grocery store. That means that I was one of the guys who would show up at some supermarket in the region at about 5 in the morning to rearrange their potato chip displays. Like maybe Lay's has a new, bubblegum flavored potato chip. And so I would be there in the morning, like rearranging all the potato chips, maybe take one row out of the barbecue potato chips and that sort of thing. Terrible job. I did it for $10 an hour. And sometimes when I did this, I was in pain. I had a recurring abscess deep in my jaw. And when that pain got too bad, I would sterilize a thumbtack over a flame. And I would kind of like fish hook myself and then punch that thumbtack down through the skin of my gums so that the pus and the blood would kind of like squirt out, and then I would be good. I wouldn't be in pain anymore, sometimes for months. And I had to do that for this part of my healthcare because I was an independent contractor. And 12 years ago, here in the United States, we did not offer or think of healthcare as a human right. This was an expression of where we lay on that spectrum. We were a little bit less towards the social, sacrificial end of the spectrum. Today, I am doing better. I'm a journalist and an author. You can see me here. I'm talking with a traditional goat herder in Morocco. We didn't share a common language, so she spoke to me in goats and flowers, which I liked quite a lot. And while I was there, I found out that Morocco also does not really live too far along the ant end of the spectrum. About 84% of Moroccans have no health care. So her health care problems were likely much, much worse than my infected jaw. So I've written this book about libertarians. It's called A Libertarian Walks into a Bear. It's been successful. I've been invited onto podcasts and talk shows and media outlets. And I found out as I started interacting with audiences about this book that it's really appealing to a very particular sort of person. Yeah, a really sort of weird sort of person. And here you all are. Um, and so your weirdness became apparent to me when I was doing that song contest. And I asked people, amateur musicians, to submit these videos introducing themselves to explain, what they were all about musically and their approach to a song contest. And I'm going to share with you a video entry that I got from one of the contestants.
Making it in the rap game is hard in 2020. Times are crazy, man. It's hard to cut through all the noise. My name's Tall Carl. I'm a rapper. I'm from Arnold, Missouri. A lot of my lyrical subject matter comes from the darkest places in my life. I've dealt with a lot of trauma, and that's the only way I've been able to talk about it. When I was really young, I lost my twin brother in a load of laundry, and it tore my whole family apart. I was in a downward spiral for years until I met Short Greg. He's my promoter and my manager now. Turned my whole life around. Music is everything to me. I try to write every day. If I had to compare myself to another artist, it would probably be a combination of Jay Dilla, Sade, and I think definitely Igor Stravinsky. I think the musician walked into a bear competition is going to be an exciting challenge. Once I started reading the book, I couldn't put it down, giving me a lot to draw on. There are a lot of talented musicians involved, and I'm looking forward to hearing what they come up with.
So that was one of the very odd entries that I received. So A Libertarian Walks into a Bear is a true story. Libertarians stand for minimal government. They want low taxes, fewer regulations. But in 2004, which is when the book opens, libertarians had a problem that I described a little bit earlier. There's never been a modern nation ruled by libertarians. They've never been in charge of a state. They haven't even been in charge of a city before. And so how are they going to show the world how great libertarianism is if they don't have a place to point to show kind of like this is what libertarianism looks like in practice. The closest thing on earth to a libertarian rule, the thing that's closest to that capitalist end of the spectrum, is Hong Kong. That's an administrative region. It's one of the most capitalistic places in the world, and very low taxes, a lot of free trade. And it's been in the news lately as the victim of the authoritarian Chinese government. But what you'll notice in this picture is that in the background, there are all these, skyscrapers that are indicative of the fact that Hong Kong has the highest concentration of ultra high net worth individuals in the world. Very, very well-to-do people. But in the foreground, of course, there's a shanty town. And that is reflective of the fact that Hong Kong, with its low regulation decisions, has created one of the biggest income inequality gaps in the world, as ranked by the CIA. Out of 177 nations, they are, I think, 156th, and no, 168th. And that's the only ones they do better on by that measure are some developing nations. So that is one of the problems that I see with libertarianism. But the libertarians thought, we can do better than Hong Kong. We can build a new society that more purely reflects our values, and we're not gonna have Hong Kong's problems. We want to create a utopia. We'll have this shining jewel. We'll show everybody what it looks like when proud cheetahs and porcupines are living the free life. And of course, they found New Hampshire would be the right place to start this idea. It's the live free or die state. It's got a very favorable tax situation. You don't have to wear a seatbelt there. Really seem to kind of like embody the libertarian ideal. So they started driving around the state of New Hampshire, looking at different towns, thinking, where are we going to found America's first free town? So they considered Grafton. What does Grafton look like? Well, you can see this is a very nice, charming, bustling little place. That is actually Grafton, Massachusetts. This is Grafton, New Hampshire. There's not much to it. There is a town garage over here. This red roof structure is the town fire station. This house-looking structure is the town offices. That's where the town clerk works and handles things like dog permits. And then this little adjunct to the house here, that is the town police station. They've got one full-time employee, the police chief, and he's been working there for many years. So it was not a very big town, there wasn't a lot going on in Grafton, not a lot of tax supported services. And that was one of the things that appealed to them, that this seems like a town that maybe doesn't have that much community to resist us. This is the only retail establishment in the town of Grafton. It's a general store turned into a gas station. It has, since the Freetown Project began, it has shut down. So where is Grafton? Grafton is about a 32-hour walk from the Beverly Public Library. A bear could make that walk in much, much less time, which means in a sense that Grafton's bear problems are Beverly's bear problems, because it's not at all hard to imagine that the Grafton bear population, when it breeds, kind of like radiates out and fills, bears have to strike out looking for their own feeding territories. And so any bad behavior that they learn in Grafton could spread out and kind of migrate down to the bears of Beverly. I first came to Grafton to interview a woman named Jessica Soul. Jessica served in the Vietnam War. She eventually became a member of the Unification Church, also known as the Moonies. When I met her, she looked like this. She had become a virtual shut-in. And I went to talk to her because she was fighting with the VA over trying to get some disability alterations made to her home that they were not willing to do. And so I went to kind of like report on her kind of dire circumstances. And I was talking to her and she says, oh, we're kind of like chit-chatting about cats because I like cats. And she says, I used to let the cats outside, but that was before the bears came. And I thought, oh, geez, well, that's a very interesting turn of phrase, before the bears came. What does that mean? And suddenly the VA stuff got much less interesting. And she started to tell me about this very unusual pattern of bear activity around her home. She had two of her kittens snatched out of her backyard while she was watching. A bear tried to force its way into her home from the back porch, and she'd had another harrowing encounter with a bear while in her wheelchair on a ramp in front of her home when she tried to get out to her mailbox. So then I started thinking like, well, what happened in Grafton? Why are bears in Grafton acting so aggressively? And when I talked to Jessica's neighbors and other people in the town of Grafton, I heard the same stuff. I heard these bears are out of control. And these were people who had lived in New England for their entire lives, and who were well aware of what the parameters of normal bear behavior were. And so I found out that these two unusual things about Grafton, the bear behavior and the Freetown project, that they were related. This is some of the folks who came to start the Freetown in the town of Grafton. The bottom left, there are two pictures here of Bob Hull. He was a businessman from New Jersey, often called Silent Bob by his friends. He started this idea of we should have a society with no rules in Grafton, and then he went on to join the New Hampshire state legislature. This guy to his right is named Tony Likas. He also went on to join the state legislature. They were hosted in Grafton by these two. This is Rosalie and John Babiars. John has run for the governorship of the state of New Hampshire 3 or 4 times on the Libertarian ticket. He's also the fire chief in town. And even though it was this kind of big public decision about whether or not these people should come, or rather, I should say, even though there would be a huge public impact on whether Grafton should become the home of the Freetown Project, these folks just had a private meeting in the firehouse and made the decision that yes, they would do this. This guy on the right that you can't see that well, that is mugshot. His name is Lawrence Edward Pendarvis. He is a mail order bride business owner, I guess, is how you would characterize him. And he wasn't going by his real name when he came to Grafton. He was using a fake name of Zach Bass, possibly because he had been indicted and convicted, though the conviction was overturned, on a prosecutorial misconduct of like 100 counts of child pornography. So this was kind of like how the Freetown Project began. These guys came, they gathered in the town firehouse. They said, yeah, we think this would be good. And then they just kind of did it. They sent out messages to libertarians from all around the country. And they started showing up. People started coming to build this utopia, but they were people who were able to just kind of pick up and move at the drop of a hat to a random small town in rural New England. And so they didn't have a lot of roots or ties to society. They didn't have a lot of jobs. They were mostly young men. You know, this vision seemed to appeal to a lot of young men. They did bring their firearms, and a lot of them didn't have the means to buy housing. So they set up non-traditional housing in little encampments in the woods. There's this whole chain of encampments of these young guys living in yurts and shipping containers and mobile homes and campers, makeshift log cabins, and in some cases, even tents. And they all came in, and they all had this shared goal that they were going to change the town into this vision that they had of a libertarian utopia. Another immediate action that happened in the early days in the Freetown involved this. This is the town's best historic asset. It's called the Grafton Center Meeting House, also known as the Grafton Church. You can see it's kind of a traditional New England steepled church built in 1798. It was just an absolutely sacred place. This was where, for hundreds of years, generations upon generations of Graftonites had come to be baptized, to be married, and to be memorialized after their death. But a farm worker, or not a farm worker, I'm sorry, a factory worker named John Cannell, he had retired from Stahl Chemical down near Boston, down your way. And he came as part of the Freetown Project, and he bought this church for $68,000 and said he was going to continue to run it as a church. And he had no formal religious training, but he said he was the pastor and that because it was a church and he was a pastor, he didn't have to pay taxes on it. And so he immediately got into an argument with the town over whether or not he would have to pay taxes, with him just kind of absolutely refusing to. So that was one blow to the town that came as the result of the Freetown. What sorts of changes did all these people make for their social experiment? Well, they showed up at every town function and they argued to oppose every expenditure of every tax dollar, virtually across the board. And they found they didn't outnumber the native Graftonites, but they found on this idea of cutting taxes allies within Grafton's pool of kind of like traditional fiscal conservative voters. And so they were able to cut municipal services pretty drastically. The planning board budget, for example, was reduced by 95%. They made cuts to the police department, the fire department, the road department, the library, and they even cut off the streetlights for the town to save on the electricity bill. And so the town culture began to shift. And one of the ways in which the town culture shifted impacted the bears. So let's talk about that for a second. Bears are yet another of my favorite animals. They can bend a car door in half. They are extremely fast. As I say in the book, they can spot the world's fastest man 25 meters in a 100-meter dash and still catch him before the finish line. But they're also very, very smart. They have a lot of gray matter but between their ears. Unlike most animals that drive largely on instinct, a bear has a great capacity to solve problems. And this has been a great survival adaptation for them over the eons because they've been able to adapt. You know, if you can think, then when one food source goes out, you can maybe figure out how to get another food source. You're not just so much at the whim of your environment. You can interact with it and adapt your behavior. You can be more plastic. And they are far more smart than many people give them credit for. There's a bear expert who lives in Killam, New Hampshire, or I'm sorry, in Lyme, New Hampshire. His name is Killam, Ben Killam. He says that bears can count to 12, which would make bears smarter than apes, great apes, which can only count to 3 or 4. Darwin, in his book on evolution, tells an anecdote about a bear in a zoo that has a little stream running past its cage, and the bear sees a crust of bread floating down the stream. And so the bear kind of like reached out with his paw and affected the current, like create a little whirlpool to draw that piece of bread in closer to the cage so that he could get it and eat it. Darwin found that to be remarkable, and I think it's still remarkable today. Ben Killam says that bears can even work out adoption schemes so that if a mother bear can't care for its cubs and it has perhaps a sister in a neighboring territory, that it can work out an arrangement and shift some of those cubs over to its sister that might have better food resources. So they're very, very smart, but they're also quite timid around people because they have learned to be wary of people, that to get mixed up with humans is not necessary or not generally good for their survival. And when the Freetown Project began, there had not been a bear attack in the whole state of New Hampshire for 150 years. But all of these people living in the woods created a new set of opportunities for bears. The first was that they had this kind of a slipshod method of living, a real patchwork set of rules. And so they each handled their food and their food waste in a different way. So that created calorie opportunities, right? So now the bears that are so smart can suddenly see that there's perhaps a new food source emerging in the woods. And also, when a bear got a little bold, in most places in the world, if a bear is too aggressive or presents behavior that's worrisome, most people call Fish and Game. They call their state wildlife authorities. But in Grafton, part of the libertarian culture was not to turn to the state as a solver of problems. They see the state as the cause of problems. And so to invite a state game warden to come and investigate a problematic bear and make recommendations that might curtail that bear's behavior was really anathema to their way of life. And so when they had a problem bear, they used their own ingenuity and came up with their own solutions for how to deal with those bears. And so I talked to many people who had different ideas of what that might look like. Some of them put cayenne pepper on their garbage so that when the bear inhaled the cayenne pepper, it would, have an unpleasant reaction and run away. Some people set booby traps for the bears. Other people threw firecrackers at the bears when they came to try to drive them away. And these were not, generally speaking, very good deterrents, because a lot of them taught the bears that, people might give you some amount of pain, but the food is still there. And if you are just a little pushier, you can get through those sorts of defenses and you can get the food that you want. So they were unintentionally training the bear population to associate humans with food, and unintentionally training them to withstand human efforts to repel them. And then there was a whole nother category of people in Grafton who are not feeding the bears unintentionally, but were feeding the bears intentionally, on purpose. There's a woman I talk about in the book that I refer to by the name of Donut Lady, because she asked to remain anonymous. And every day, twice a day, Donut Lady would exit her house with two big, heavy pails full of grain topped with sugared donuts. And she had a little group of bears that would be waiting for her at a prearranged feeding place, kind of like crowding each other to get the food, like your dogs or cats might at dinner time in your house. And she developed a very, very close, intimate relationship with some of these bears. I was worried because she told me that these bears didn't hibernate. Why would you hibernate if you have donuts on offer all winter? And so I said, well, if you're going out there, it looks like it would get very slick and icy out there. Weren't you worried that you would fall? And she said, oh, well, I fell down all the time. It was fine. And so, certainly this seems like a very dangerous situation, but nothing bad ever happened to her, except that the bears that she was feeding, of course, did not contain themselves to her property. They took their behaviors over to the neighbors, and they taught their young all sorts of things about bear behavior that we humans would probably prefer they not learn. So these sorts of factors came to a head in an incident that involved this woman. Her name is Tracy Colburn. She was feeding this dog inside her house about 10 o'clock one night. She lives alone in a mobile home. She let her dog out to pee at the end of the night, just before bedtime. And her porch was, in her words, just full of bear. There were 3 bears on that little porch in the background there. And 2 of them ran away. And the third one started to fight with Kai, the dog. And Tracy had heard, as you may have heard, that if you feel threatened by a black bear, you want to be aggressive and look strong and powerful and intimidate it so that it doesn't attack you. So Tracy screamed at the bear, following that advice. But in this case, the bear was pinned down by the dog. It felt threatened by Tracy, And so when she screamed at it, it attacked her. It responded to that threat. And she did survive. This photo is taken post-attack, but you can see these bandages on her wrists. And the bear injured her wrists, both on the front, kind of like tore into both of her wrists in a way that created massive bleeding for her. And she managed to get back inside, but she was left in a really harrowing situation where she was in danger of bleeding out in her home. And there's no cell service in Grafton. So she was not able to call anyone for help. And she liked to have a cell phone when she was outside of Grafton. She couldn't afford both a cell phone and a landline. So she had no landline. So she had to figure out how, when she was bleeding horrifically and had damaged arms, to get out of her home where the bears go into the place where this marauding bear was, and somehow get help for herself. So I tell that story in the book, and I hope folks check that out. Other impacts of the Freetown Project. This is the church that I mentioned earlier. I told you a factory worker bought it and started fighting with the town over whether he would have to pay taxes on it. Well, one night, it was in January, after he'd been there for several years, a fire broke out. It was all the more tragic because not only did the town lose this precious historic resource, but John himself was inside the church when it caught fire, and he died, and the authorities have not ruled out arson. So there's still some questions to be answered in his tragic death. Another impact, this is a road rage incident. Photo was taken by the local newspaper where I used to work, the Valley News. Support your local newspapers, they're important. And Freetowner got into like a stop and start road ragey type thing on Route 4 in Grafton. And both vehicles stopped and two men got out to argue with one another. And one of the guys, the guy who was not a Freetowner, punched the Freetowner, and the Freetowner pulled out his gun and shot the other guy in the stomach. And both of these men had small children in the car at the time. So the town culture was shifting. This is a woman named April Rogers. She was 71 years old. She didn't live in Grafton. She lived in a mobile home in an adjacent town of Grafton. She heard a bear in her kitchen at 3 in the morning one night. She wheeled out there in her wheelchair to see what was going on. And she didn't make the mistake that Tracy made. She said, I'm going to just sit here quietly. I don't want to threaten it. And then at some point, the bear will leave. But the bear felt enclosed and trapped in her kitchen. And it was very, very anxious. And she said, it just let me have it. And this is what April looked like after the attack. You can see that it kind of ripped the side of her, the skin on the side of her head down. And happily she survived. But this is just another example of how this sort of human behavior can boom in weird and unexpected ways. Since I wrote the book, there's been a third bear attack in the region in another neighboring town. That one was much less severe, thankfully, but a guy was getting an air conditioner out of a pickup truck one night, and the bear just attacked him from behind. And he fortunately was able to drive it away and only suffered minor injuries. So that kind of brings me back to where we began. We are the only animals with the power to choose what we will sacrifice for others. Only in a free democratic society like America can we all as humans exercise that power. So, how do we want to be? What sorts of communities do we want to build? Do we want to build one that's social or more solitary? And clearly through my experiences, I am landing more toward the idea of social societies with strong civic structures. I understand the appeal of rugged individualism, but the impact can be quite severe. I found that bears are best managed through collective action and strategies. We need stronger rules about waste keeping, experts helping to resolve problems when they arise. And the Freetown project ended in 2016, but I did find some signs of life in the town in the Grafton Public Library. So that is very nice, isn't it? A very nice library. That is actually the library in Grafton, Massachusetts. Here's Grafton's. It's a little less grand. You can see that it has up on the side there a porta potty. That's the only facilities that it has. It was from about 9 years ago. They inherited it from the rec department, which didn't want it anymore because it was cracked and used. But when I go there when I went there to research this book, I found that there were people there who still cared about their town and their community and who saw a brighter future. The library itself had come under extreme attack from the libertarians during the Freetown era. They put forth a proposal that the staff should not be paid. When they were told that this was illegal, they came up with a counter proposal, that they could perhaps just pay the staff a token amount of $1 per hour. Fortunately, that did not go through, but the library does operate under such severe budget constraints that when I wanted to go there during work week to research the book, it was only open Wednesday mornings from 9 to 12, 3-hour period. And so that is why I am so grateful that you people are here in association with your library. Libraries are just such a fantastic expression of civic pride and community. Ona did not ask me to say this, but I hope that you continue to participate in the library. Those who can contribute money are bringing something with a very quantifiable value. But when you devote your time and your energy and take advantage of the resources that a library has to offer, of course, you are bolstering that library and supporting it in equally important ways. And I think that if Grafton is going to bounce back in the future, it's going to need the folks in its library to be the nucleus of that change. And so that's it. Support your library, folks. That is my message. And I would be delighted to take questions if Ona and Graham have any on tap. I suppose they can, are we preferring that they submit their questions via chat, or are we asking folks?
Actually, if you want to take the slideshow down, we can also keep an eye out. It'll be easier to see the gallery view of people if they want to unmute and raise their hands, but we can also, I see Rob.
First of all, the chat function appears to be dysfunctional in this particular presentation.
Oh no.
Be from my end. But having said that, and really appreciating your perspective, Matt, on all of this. I am a board member of my local Friends of the Library group, so I'm all for supporting that community function. Two brief comments on the bears themselves. You're presenting a sort of a Darwinian story, broadly speaking, of this particular tragedy of the commons. And without getting into it, because it's quite a rabbit hole, your examples of the bears are quite Lamarckian. Nothing against Lamarck, but it's a little bit of a mixed metaphor with evolutionary theory, which is an interesting, just an observation. Secondly, though, I'm born and raised 70 years in New Hampshire. It's not just a Grafton story, and it's not just the Free Staters. The bears are all over the place: Danbury, Springfield, Bradford, Andover, you name it. So I don't think you can blame it on the town of Grafton or attribute it to. And one step further about the Free Staters, they don't speak for all libertarians, let alone all New Hampshire residents, that our phylogenetic tree up here is quite diverse and complex and intricate. And there are these issues, but the Free Staters don't really run things up here.
Rob,
That's it. I'll get off my soapbox.
Yeah, Rob, I'm really, really excited to hear your comments. That's some really thoughtful insight. And it does give me an opportunity to say some nice things about libertarians, because they are a voice that is here in our political discussion of our ongoing experiment of America. And they want to provide a check against government overreach, and so part of what they do is a service to us, and that they always give us an opportunity to question whether or not some sort of particular government action is an encroachment that goes too far on our individual rights and individual freedoms. And so that's good. I want that voice in my political discourse. But yeah, from what I see when libertarians try to put this into practice, I kind of just don't want libertarians in charge of things like my healthcare or my schooling system or most of the other functions that I think government, by and large, does a pretty good job at. And you're definitely correct that the bear issue is not unique to Grafton. Certainly there's the potential for bear conflict everywhere, everywhere that there's bears. And the state has done an incredibly good job over the last 65 years of growing our bear population. In 1950, there were hardly any bears in the state of New Hampshire. That is about when we stopped paying bounties to kill bears and instead started nurturing and protecting areas so that bears could thrive in them. And the bear population has responded and rebounded amazingly well. So in order for that to work, you need a well-funded state department that can tamp down those problems. And part of the way that they do that is with their wildlife officers, right? I call up, I say, hey, there's a bear. It was on my porch. I didn't like the way it was looking at me. Then they ask me some screening questions. If necessary, they come out and they take a look and they say, oh, well, you left your bird feeder up. So that's on you. Take your bird feeder down. Your problem will go away. And they'll employ their expertise. But what we've done is we have not funded the State Department fish and game in New Hampshire particularly well. In fact, they've undergone a budget crisis over the last 20 years, and they are increasingly reliant on just a kind of inexpensive public education campaign to manage these bear-human interactions. And the problem with that is that people are becoming increasingly resistant, or there is a pocket of people that is increasingly resistant to following any state advice on anything. And so then you get people saying, oh, the government says I shouldn't feed bears. Well, guess what? I'm going to go take some donuts out in my backyard and have some fun. And while the problem is expressed everywhere throughout the state, I do find that the Freetown Project had a unique and dramatic expression of that simmering problem. And the evidence that I point to that, that I look to point to that, is that all three of those bear attacks have happened in one cluster in this tiny little corner of the state after 150 years of zero bear attacks. And so I think, you know, not every bear that lives in Grafton is necessarily going to hurt somebody. But I think you've just increased the possibility and set the stage for more problematic bear activities to occur. So yeah, no, it's definitely something that we can all sit up and take notice of. But I do find that in Grafton, it was worse. And I do appreciate you saying that there's a diversity of thought within the libertarian community. And I think that's certainly true. And that's part of the value of seeing a social experiment play out, is that the rubber has to meet the road in some of these differing ideas within the community.
The bears are certainly endowed with prepared learning faculties. And if you do stupid things, they're smart enough to be opportunistic. And it's not necessarily a political factor, but
yeah, well, I guess the politics
behavior varies.
Yeah,
your experience may vary.
That's true. That's true.
There are a few questions in chat.
Yeah,
there are a few questions in chat. So someone, sorry I missed it. When did this libertarian era happen?
Oh, it began in 2004. And what kind of killed it was in 2016 is really when it lost its steam. There wasn't like an official formal call, you know, hey, this is it, we're done. But when the Free State Project began, which was basically the same idea on this much broader scale that I think Rob was hinting at as well, basically the nation's libertarians and the world's libertarians were told, if you want to do something utopian and cool to advance the cause of libertarianism, instead of coming to this one place in New Hampshire called Grafton, come anywhere in the state that you would like to go. And why would they come to Grafton? It was in a shambles by then. You know, they instead, by and large, chose other communities that had more robust municipal services underpinning things like, you know, business infrastructure and, you know, parks and movie theaters and all the rest of it.
And that probably addresses the next question, which is, where did the Free Towners go? They went to the Free State Project. Okay. And then what is going on now in the town? Yeah,
yeah, I would love to say that once the Freetown Project wound down, that Grafton kind of like, you know, really redoubled its efforts to build community and to address with a new spate of taxes some of the problems that came about during the Freetown era. But that's really not true. They are just as fiscally tight as ever. The last 2 years, they've actually reduced their municipal budget even further, which is crazy to me, that when it seems like there are so many pressing needs in the town. But one bright spot is that the church has become the responsibility of an active civic nonprofit called Mascoma Valley Forward. And they are accepting donations and getting state grant dollars and that sort of thing. And they're dedicated to restoring that church to provide a useful function in the community. And so I think that's something we can all look to as a positive change.
And Nancy, you have your icon. Yeah.
Just an experience too, being in New Hampshire. And I'm sorry, I missed a section in there because I had a phone call, but did you mention that Governor Benson was governor at that time, I believe, in New Hampshire? And I worked for the state, and oh my God, we were a division, and he totally eliminated us within Health and Human Services. And it was a really tough 2 years, and the state voted him out. But I believe he was one of the people who did the invitation. Did you mention that? Or
yeah, I didn't mention it in my talk. It is discussed briefly in the book, and you're absolutely right. Yeah, like, you know, when John Babiars, who was, you know, interested in running for governor, invited them to his town, he said, I'm sure that part of his calculation was, oh, if there's more libertarians here and I'm running as libertarian candidate for governor, well, that's good for me. And he held a fundraiser at one point for Craig Benson, Governor Benson, and like a barbecue backyard type thing. And at that barbecue, Benson kind of said the same thing. I'm sure it seemed like an innocent proclamation at the time, but I said, yeah, we would love to have you here. Please come on in. He heard an opportunity to promote the state as a good place for conservative voices. But the impact, the impact has just not been, I think, what they had hoped for. And in fact, John Babiarz, he at one point in his role as fire chief called upon to put out a fire, an illegal campfire that was being done by some of the Freetowners. And when he came and put out their fire over their objections, they turned on him really hard, and they started calling him an authoritarian thug. And the next time he ran for governor as a libertarian, this core group that was supposed to support him, or you would think would support him, discounted him and felt like he was not hardcore enough to represent their movement. So yeah, they definitely had influence with both Governor Benson and in the state legislature. Rob said, they're not running the show. Certainly, they've got more influence now, I think, than at any point in history. And they've also found, I think, with the pandemic and the mask issue, they found real areas of overlap and agreement with more traditional conservatives.
Yeah, I mean, we have some in our town even, and but like what Governor Benson did when he did come in, he had a house on the water. He just overrode any limitations by the Department of Environmental Services, and made a beach and did all these illegal things and drove into the state with his Humvee. I mean, it was really, he was such a statement of just, it's me and for me. And so I worked for the Division of Public, I worked for alcohol and drug substance misuse, and he totally eliminated us, and it cost more to rebuild everything that we had done, the destruction he did in 2 years. But it's always been one of those things we hear up north. I was just,
the race is not to the swift.
That's right. Yeah. And so often, you cut the tax dollar today and you wind up with a cost tax burden of $20 tomorrow.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks. It was fascinating.
Thanks very much, Nancy.
Anything else? All right. Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much. And have a good day, everyone. All right.
This is great. Thank you all so much. There were wonderful questions. And yeah, I love to hear from folks on Twitter and via email. So feel free to reach out to me via those channels as well. Thank you so much, Ona. It was a blast.
All right. Thank you. All right.